Welcome back to another Explainer, everyone. Today, we're looking at what just might be the absolute wildest and initially the most universally hated real estate deal in American history. We're asking one massive question. Was buying Alaska the most expensive mistake America ever made, or literally the ultimate masterstroke? You know, when we think about American expansion, we usually picture the Louisiana Purchase, right? Or the push out west. But the story of Alaska, it's completely unique. It's this crazy tale of geopolitical chess, immense risk, and public ridicule that ultimately reshaped the United States' standing in the world. So let's set the stage for how this incredible deal actually came together.
Okay, let's dive into this. What if I told you that the United States once bought an entire territory? We're talking over 580,000 square miles of land for less than the price of the smartphone you might be holding right now, at least when you look at the per acre cost. It breaks down to roughly 2 cents an acre. 2 cents! It sounds completely absurd. Imagine walking into a real estate office today and them offering you land for less than the cost of a gumball per acre. No way, right? It bends the mind. Yet this sense of total disproportion is exactly where our story begins, and it's a perfect example of why digging into American history is so rewarding for us. We're talking about an area more than twice the size of Texas, acquired for what basically amounts to pocket change in today's geopolitical terms. $7.2 million. Back in 1867, Secretary of State William Seward handed over a check for exactly $7.2 million to buy Alaska straight from Tsar Alexander II. See, Russia was completely strapped for cash after the disastrous Crimean War, and they desperately needed to offload the territory. They were actually terrified that if a war broke out with their great rival, Britain, they'd just lose Alaska anyway, so they needed a buyer and they needed cash fast. Enter William Seward. He was this huge expansionist who dreamed of a United States stretching across the entire continent, so he absolutely jumped at the opportunity. They actually hammered out the deal in this crazy marathon overnight session, finally signing the treaty at 4 a.m. on March 30th. But to the American public, well, let's just say spending millions on a massive piece of uncharted land right after the Civil War was definitely not met with a standing ovation.
Which brings us to Section 1, Seward's Frozen Folly and the Brutal Market Backlash.
Seward's folly. That was the insult hurled by the press and politicians alike. You have to remember, America was still recovering from the financial ruin of the Civil War, which had ended literally just 2 years prior. The nation was fractured, it was deeply in debt, and everyone was fully focused on Reconstruction. To the average citizen, the idea of spending $7.2 million, which was a massive chunk of the federal budget back then, on some icy expanse thousands of miles away, it seemed like sheer lunacy. Seward's acquisition was immediately dismissed as a useless frozen wasteland. They called it a polar bear garden and a monumental waste of taxpayer money. Newspapers printed these scathing cartoons mocking him, coining terms like Seward's icebox and Wall Russia. The opposition was so incredibly fierce that the House of Representatives actually delayed funding the purchase for over a whole year.
And this brilliantly illustrates the massive gap between perception and reality. Back in 1867, everyone dismissed it as just a giant icebox. But hiding right beneath that ice was one of the most resource-rich regions on the entire planet. It's the classic case of evaluating a long-term asset through a really short-term lens. At the time, the land was mapped mostly just along the coastlines. The vast interior, a total mystery to the American government. They really thought they bought some ice, a few trading posts, and some sea otters. The public sentiment was incredibly hostile, and they were completely blind to the economic powerhouse they had just acquired. What they actually secured was an eventual treasure trove of minerals, timber, and a strategic coastline that would one day define American power in both the Pacific and the Arctic. But you know, it would take decades for anyone to realize what they actually held.
Let's move right into Section 2, the golden turning point and the dramatic market shift. So let's look at the timeline and see how this builds, because the narrative definitely didn't shift overnight. Decades after that 1867 purchase, the game changed entirely when the 1896 Klondike Gold Rush hit. When that strike happened, around 100,000 prospectors flooded right into the region. Suddenly, it wasn't just ice anymore, it was a literal treasure chest. That single event completely vindicated William Seward because the gold they extracted almost immediately eclipsed that original $7.2 million price tag. Then, as the 20th century progressed, the discoveries just kept on coming. We're talking zinc, lead, copper, and silver unearthed in staggering quantities. Fast forward to 1968, and the discovery of massive oil reserves in Prudhoe Bay, literally one of the largest oil fields ever found in North America, elevated the state's value to an entirely new stratosphere. By the time the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was finished, the state was pumping out millions of barrels of crude, bringing us to a present-day valuation in the hundreds of billions.
Which leads us straight into Section 3, a $1 billion ROI and arguably the greatest investment ever.
So the crucial point here is that today, Alaska's worth is almost immeasurable. We're talking easily in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Between the vast oil fields, endless timber, booming fisheries, and sheer geopolitical strategic value, it stands proudly as one of the most resource-rich regions on Earth. Just think about the scale of those returns. For a second, the commercial fishing industry in Alaska alone generates billions of dollars every single year, supplying a massive percentage of the nation's seafood. The timber and mining sectors? Absolute industrial giants. Plus, in our modern world, Alaska provides the United States with a completely critical strategic foothold in the Arctic, which is a region of growing global importance. It is the ultimate return on investment, from a $7.2 million joke to an absolute economic powerhouse. Honestly, if you took all of the wealth generated by Alaska since 1867, it arguably goes down as the single most lucrative land deal in human history.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought today. Knowing what they knew back then, seeing a frozen economy and a nation buried in post-war debt, would you have possessed the courage to buy Alaska for $7.2 million? It's so easy for us to sit here and say yes with historical hindsight, but taking a massive risk when the whole country is actively laughing at you? That takes incredible vision, and it's such a timeless lesson in looking beyond the surface. This is the true takeaway for us as focused learners. Every great breakthrough, every monumental investment, often looks incredibly foolish to the masses at the very beginning. William Seward endured relentless public humiliation, yet he never backed down, because he saw the long-term potential when everyone else just saw a short-term liability. So the next time you encounter an idea that the crowd is super quick to mock, ask yourself, are they seeing the whole picture, or are they just looking at the ice?
As always, I really hope this explainer helped structure your understanding of this amazing moment in American history. If you love this deep dive and want to keep learning with me, make sure to follow USA Hub for more incredible American facts. We've got so many more wild stories from America's past to unpack together, and you definitely won't want to miss what we have queued up next. Thank you so much for your focus today. Stay curious, keep exploring, and I'll catch you in the next one.